On the surface, Evelyn's life looked picture perfect. She was in her mid-40s with a warm smile that made her neighbors trust her instantly and a calm, graceful demeanor that earned her the admiration of her church community. She and her husband, Robert, had been married for nearly 20 years, raising two teenage children in a comfortable suburban neighborhood where the lawns were trimmed, the mailboxes shone, and everyone waved as they drove past. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. If anything, their life seemed enviable. Her younger sister, Margaret, visited often. Margaret was 5 years younger, single, and always had a touch of mischief in her spirit. The two sisters shared a bond forged through childhood hardships. They had grown up in a small town with strict parents who had struggled to make ends meet. Evelyn had been the responsible one, the caretaker, the girl who made sure her sister had clean clothes and a packed lunch. Margaret was the wild one, curious, adventurous, sometimes reckless. Now, in their adult years, their dynamic hadn't changed much. Evelyn still carried herself as the dependable one, the anchor in Margaret's sometimes turbulent life. Margaret, meanwhile, brought sparks of laughter and boldness into Evelyn's carefully arranged world. Their conversations often spilled late into the night over cups of tea in Evelyn's tidy kitchen. Yet beneath this surface of warmth, Evelyn sometimes felt the faintest ripple of unease. Robert, once affectionate and full of conversation, had grown distant in recent years. His late nights at work became more frequent, his excuses more rehearsed, and his phone more guarded. Evelyn noticed it, but told herself not to overthink. She had seen friends fall apart because of paranoia and mistrust, and she refused to let her imagination poison her marriage. But there were moments, tiny, nagging moments that she couldn't shake. A faint perfume on Robert's shirt, one she didn't wear, a strange quiet when she entered the room while he was texting, the way he locked his phone now, even at home, something he never used to do. Evelyn, practical and kind, always brushed these thoughts aside. She wanted to believe in the man she had built her life with. It wasn't until Margaret stumbled into the middle of it that the threads began to unravel. One evening, Margaret stopped by unannounced. She carried a bottle of wine, her dark curls pulled back carelessly, and her lipstick slightly smudged from a hurried cab ride. She was buzzing with energy, eager to share some dramatic story about her new job. Evelyn welcomed her in, happy to escape her own nagging suspicions for a while. The sisters laughed, poured glasses of wine, and Margaret leaned against the kitchen counter, chattering about a coworker. That's when her phone buzzed. She glanced down, frowned briefly, then tucked it away. Evelyn didn't think much of it. Margaret always had men circling her, half-serious flings and late-night admirers. But later that night, when Evelyn went to tidy up after Margaret left, she noticed something odd. On the counter lay a crumpled receipt that must have fallen from her purse. It was from a small Italian restaurant, dated just the night before. Evelyn's eyes moved over the printed details and then froze on a name scrawled hastily across the back. Robert. Her chest tightened. She stared at the receipt, her pulse racing, trying to convince herself it was a coincidence. Robert was a common name. Margaret had dozens of friends, co-workers, acquaintances. It could be anyone. She set it aside, trying to steady her breathing. But the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, lying beside Robert in their large, neatly made bed, Evelyn couldn't sleep. His breathing was deep, steady, and peaceful, but to her it sounded like a stranger's. She stared at the ceiling in the dark, her mind racing through possibilities. Was her sister hiding something from her? Was Robert? Were both of them keeping secrets in her own home under her nose? The next morning, she tried to shake it off. She made breakfast for the children, packed their lunches, and smiled as they rushed out the door. Robert kissed her on the cheek before heading to work, just as he always did, but she noticed the way his eyes didn't quite meet hers. It was small, fleeting, but Evelyn noticed everything. Her day passed in a blur of chores, errands, and small talk with neighbors, but the receipt kept tugging at her thoughts like an invisible thread. By the time Margaret called that evening to check in, Evelyn's voice was cool, more measured than usual. She asked casual questions, listened carefully to Margaret's answers, and found herself searching for cracks in her sister's stories. Margaret, ever lively, seemed oblivious. She laughed, gossiped, and teased Evelyn for being too serious, but Evelyn heard something in the background of her voice. Hesitation, maybe guilt. She couldn't quite tell. And so for the first time in her life, Evelyn began to doubt the two people she had trusted most, her husband and her sister. The betrayal wasn't yet confirmed, but it lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of a revelation that would tear apart everything she thought she knew and force her to choose between quiet suffering and silent revenge. The next few days unfolded like a slow storm building on the horizon. Evelyn went through the motions of her routine, cooking meals, managing the house, checking in on her children's homework, but her mind was elsewhere, consumed by questions she couldn't silence. Every smile Robert gave her now seemed rehearsed. Every word Margaret spoke felt weighed down with unspoken meanings. Evelyn had always trusted them implicitly, and yet now she noticed the tiniest details with an almost painful clarity. The faint change in Robert's cologne, the way Margaret's stories often trailed off when she mentioned her evenings. She tried to tell herself she was imagining things, that years of marriage could naturally create distance, that Margaret's private life was hers to guard. But the image of that crumpled restaurant receipt burned in her memory. She had tucked it away inside a drawer, but it felt like it was glowing in the dark, waiting to be confronted. One evening, as she cleared the dinner table, Robert announced casually, "I'll be working late again tomorrow. Big project. Don't wait up." Evelyn's hands froze on a stack of plates. That phrase, "don't wait up," was becoming all too familiar. He used to rush home, eager to spend time with the family. Now his late nights had become so routine that even the children barely looked up when he said it. She forced a smile, nodding, "Of course, just don't overwork yourself." But inside, her resolve was shifting. That night, Evelyn stood at the window, watching Robert's car disappear down the street. She turned the receipt over in her hand again. The date matched one of his supposed late nights. She closed her eyes, her chest tightening as the realization sank deeper. The next day, Evelyn made a decision she never thought she would. She would follow him. It was a crisp Thursday evening, the sky streaked with orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. Evelyn told the children she had errands to run, left them with dinner prepped in the fridge, and waited until Robert left for work. She gave him a head start, then slipped into her own car, her heart pounding like a drum. She kept her distance as she drove. Robert's taillights glowed faintly ahead, steady and familiar, but suddenly strange, like she was following a stranger wearing her husband's skin. Every turn he made, every stoplight felt like a test of her courage. Finally, he pulled into a small restaurant, not a workplace, not an office building. Evelyn parked across the street, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Through the window, she saw him step inside, his expression relaxed in a way it hadn't been at home in years. And then Margaret appeared. Her breath caught in her throat. She leaned forward, her stomach churning as she watched her younger sister slide into the booth across from Robert. They didn't kiss. They didn't hold hands. But there was an intimacy in the way they leaned toward each other, in the soft laughter she could see but not hear that pierced her like a knife. She stayed there, frozen, her world unraveling before her eyes, memories of childhood, Margaret's small hand clutching hers, the promises they made to always protect each other, clashed with the sight of her sister sharing secrets with Robert in the dim glow of a restaurant booth. When she finally forced herself to leave, her eyes were burning with unshed tears. She drove aimlessly, circling quiet streets until the tears spilled over and blurred the road. She pulled over, resting her forehead against the steering wheel, trying to steady her breathing. The betrayal wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real. But Evelyn wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. She knew herself too well. If she stormed into the restaurant, if she let her fury loose, the damage would be immediate, explosive, and irreversible. And Robert was clever. Margaret, too. If she accused them without proof, they could twist her words, deny everything, make her doubt her own eyes. No, Evelyn needed more. The next morning, she resolved to be patient, to watch, to listen, to collect the evidence she needed until there was no room for denial. She had always been quiet, dependable Evelyn, the woman who smiled politely and kept her household running smoothly. But now she felt something stirring inside her, a new kind of strength, sharp and silent, born of pain. Over the following week, Evelyn became someone she never thought she could be. She began keeping track of Robert's comings and goings, writing down the dates and times he claimed to be working late. She noted when Margaret called, how long they spoke, and whether their stories aligned. She checked credit card statements, receipts, tiny scraps of information that Robert left behind in his haste. And the more she observed, the clearer the picture became. Small lies, woven together, formed a net of betrayal that was tightening around her. One evening, she overheard Robert on the phone in the garage. His voice was low, almost tender, the way it had been with her. He whispered, "I'll see you soon," before hanging up quickly when he realized Evelyn had stepped outside. He smiled, too casually. "Just work stuff," he said, brushing past her. But Evelyn knew better now. That night, lying awake in bed, Evelyn stared into the darkness. Her heart still ached, but her mind was sharper than ever. She no longer saw herself as the helpless victim of her husband's lies or her sister's betrayal. No. She was gathering strength. She was planning. Her revenge wouldn't be loud or messy. It would be deliberate, precise, and silent. And when the time came, Robert and Margaret would never see it coming. The days following Evelyn's secret discovery were a blur of emotions: anger, sorrow, disbelief. But beneath all of that was a quiet determination that surprised even her. She had always been the steady one, the peacekeeper, the dependable sister and wife. Margaret had been the free spirit, reckless at times, but charming enough to make people forgive her. Evelyn had spent much of her life protecting Margaret from her own mistakes. But this was different. This was no mistake. Evelyn knew she couldn't live forever in silent observation. Sooner or later, she had to step closer, to test the waters, to see just how deep Margaret's betrayal ran. It began one Saturday morning. Margaret stopped by the house, carrying a basket of pastries like she often did. The children loved their fun aunt who spoiled them with treats, and Evelyn forced a smile as she greeted her sister at the door. "Morning, Ev," Margaret said cheerfully, her eyes bright. "I brought croissants from that bakery you love." Evelyn accepted the basket, her fingers brushing against Margaret's. For a moment, she searched her sister's face, looking for cracks, any sign of guilt. But Margaret's smile was flawless, her tone casual. They sat at the kitchen table, the children running off to the backyard. Margaret talked freely about her week, about friends she'd seen, movies she wanted to watch. Evelyn nodded, her responses calm, but every word felt like a test. Then Evelyn asked gently, "So, how's everything going with you? Anyone special in your life these days?" Margaret's fork paused midair, just for a second. It was subtle, but Evelyn caught it, the slight hesitation, the flicker in her eyes. Margaret laughed lightly, recovering quickly. "Oh, you know me, always busy. No one's serious." Evelyn tilted her head, smiling faintly. "Funny. I thought I saw you out the other night, at that little Italian place near Main Street." Margaret's grip on her coffee cup tightened, but she didn't falter. "Really? Must have been someone else. I haven't been there in ages." Evelyn held her gaze for a long moment, then let the silence stretch. She didn't press further. Not yet. The conversation shifted, but Evelyn knew she had struck a nerve. Margaret's calm demeanor was too polished, too controlled. She recognized that kind of performance because she herself had been practicing it for weeks. Later that afternoon, as Margaret left, she leaned in to hug Evelyn. The embrace was warm, familiar, but Evelyn felt the weight of secrets between them. Margaret whispered, "Take care of yourself, sis. Don't work too hard." Evelyn almost laughed at the irony. Instead, she whispered back, "Always." When the door closed behind her sister, Evelyn's mask slipped. She stood in the quiet hallway, her heart pounding. That single exchange had confirmed it for her. Margaret was hiding something, and she was hiding it well. But Evelyn was no longer the woman who ignored her instincts. She was watching, waiting. A week later, Evelyn decided to push the boundaries again. This time, she invited Margaret over herself. She suggested a sister's night, something they hadn't done in years. Margaret agreed readily, perhaps too readily, as if eager to prove there was nothing to hide. They cooked dinner together, poured glasses of wine, and reminisced about childhood memories. At times, Evelyn almost forgot the storm brewing beneath the surface. She looked at Margaret's laughter, at the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke about the past, and a part of her longed to believe it was all innocent, that her sister couldn't possibly betray her like this. But then Margaret's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then flipped it face down quickly, too quickly. Evelyn caught the motion out of her corner of an eye. "Who's that?" Evelyn asked, casually, sipping her wine. "Oh, just a friend. Nothing important." Evelyn smiled softly, leaning back in her chair. "Funny. You've got a lot of friends these days." There it was again, the flicker in Margaret's eyes, a tiny crack in her carefully crafted mask. Evelyn didn't push further. Instead, she laughed, steering the conversation elsewhere. But deep down, she felt both a pang of grief and a surge of power. She was learning to play the same game Margaret was playing, only better. That night, after Margaret left, Evelyn checked the wine glasses still sitting on the table. Margaret's lipstick stain lingered on the rim, bright and mocking. Evelyn stood there for a long time, staring at the glass, her chest tight with conflicting emotions. For so long, she had thought of Margaret as the person she could always trust, the one who knew her best. Now, she saw her sister not as family, but a stranger sitting across the table, weaving lies with every smile. But Evelyn wasn't broken. She was sharpening herself, preparing for the moment when the truth would finally be undeniable. Her revenge wasn't about anger anymore. It was about control, about patience, about reclaiming the power that had been stolen from her in whispers and shadows. And slowly, she began to sketch out her plan. A few nights later, Evelyn lay awake in bed, listening to Robert's steady breathing beside her. She turned to look at him, studying the face she once adored. He seemed peaceful, innocent, but she knew better now. Her mind replayed the image of Margaret sitting across from him at that restaurant, laughing softly, their heads bent close together. It cut her deeply, but also fueled her resolve. She whispered into the darkness, so soft that even she barely heard it. "You won't see me coming." And with that, Evelyn finally fell asleep, not with despair, but with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who knew her silence would soon become her greatest weapon. The silence was no longer enough. Evelyn had tasted the tension of subtle confrontation with Margaret, and it had only sharpened her instincts. Every glance, every hesitation, every lie cloaked in laughter made her more certain of the truth. But certainty wasn't enough. She needed proof. Late one evening, when Robert was in the shower, Evelyn sat at the kitchen counter with his phone in her hand. Her fingers trembled, not from guilt, but from adrenaline. She had never snooped before, never needed to, but tonight she crossed a line she couldn't uncross. At first, the messages seemed ordinary, reminders from colleagues, notes about errands. But then she found it, threads buried under innocuous names, conversations full of inside jokes, half-spelled phrases, and secret rendezvous. And Margaret's name. Her throat tightened. She scrolled further, her heart pounding with every word. There were dinners, late-night drives, confessions masked as comfort. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was intimate, layered with the kind of closeness that should have belonged only to her. Evelyn set the phone down, her face pale, but her resolve steel. The pain was no longer raw, it was cold, precise. Now she knew. The next day, Evelyn drove to a small electronics shop in a neighboring town. She couldn't risk being recognized, couldn't risk whispers. She bought a discreet voice recorder, a hidden camera, and a burner phone. As she tucked the items into her bag, she felt an unfamiliar surge of empowerment. For years, she had been the quiet wife, the loyal sister, the dependable anchor. But now, she was something else entirely, a hunter cloaked in patience. She started small. A recorder slipped under the passenger seat of Robert's car. A tiny camera angled perfectly in the living room, disguised among books on the shelf. She wasn't careless. She knew she couldn't gather evidence that would expose her plan too soon. Every step had to be deliberate, measured, and slowly, her collection grew. One evening, while Robert claimed he was working late, Evelyn sat in the darkened den with headphones, listening to the recorder. The sound of his voice filled her ears, warm, familiar, deceptive. Then came Margaret's laughter, light and intimate, echoing in the background. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the sound sink into her bones. Every laugh, every whispered word was another knife, but instead of breaking her, it steeled her further. She began saving files, organizing them neatly on the burner phone under labeled folders: dinner, phone call, weekend, evidence, proof, power. Days turned into weeks, and Evelyn wore her mask flawlessly. To Robert, she was the same loving wife, gentle, attentive, even forgiving of his long hours. To Margaret, she was the devoted sister, sharing laughter over coffee and even helping her shop for a new dress. But behind the mask, Evelyn was calculating. One afternoon, she suggested to Margaret that they go shopping together downtown. Margaret agreed, unsuspecting. As they strolled through the boutiques, Evelyn watched her carefully. Margaret picked out a silk scarf, her eyes bright with mischief. Evelyn said, "That would look lovely on you. Robert would probably like it too." For just a flicker of a second, Margaret froze. Evelyn caught it. Another piece of proof, not recorded on devices, but etched into her memory. When they returned to Evelyn's house, Margaret excused herself to take a phone call on the porch. Evelyn stayed inside, sipping tea, her ears sharp. Through the thin crack of the door, heard Margaret's voice soften. "Yes, I miss you too. No, she doesn't suspect anything." Evelyn's hand tightened around her teacup, but her face remained still. She didn't confront her sister, not yet. Instead, she let Margaret finish her whispered conversation, walked back in with a smile, and asked if she wanted another slice of cake. Patience. Always patience. Later that night, Evelyn sat at her desk with the burner phone. She played the recordings again, carefully editing snippets, trimming moments, saving them into a neat collection. She wasn't reckless. She didn't intend to throw them into Robert's face or scream at Margaret. That would be too easy, too loud. No. Evelyn wanted something quieter, something lasting. She wanted her revenge to echo. Her first move came quietly. She printed a single photograph she had captured from the hidden camera, Robert and Margaret sitting too close together on the living room sofa when she was out. She placed the photo inside an envelope and slipped it into Margaret's bag one afternoon when her sister wasn't looking. She didn't include a note. Didn't need to. That night, Margaret called her, voice trembling slightly. "Evelyn, did you leave something in my bag?" Evelyn feigned confusion. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," Margaret said quickly, forcing a laugh. "Must have been a mistake. But Evelyn could hear it, the crack in her sister's confidence, the fear that maybe someone else knew, that maybe her secrets weren't as hidden as she thought. Evelyn smiled to herself, sitting in the dark. The first seed of doubt had been planted. From then on, Evelyn escalated carefully. A message slipped anonymously to Robert's office phone. "Does your wife know?" A note left on Margaret's car windshield with nothing but the single word, liar. Each time, Evelyn remained silent, the perfect wife, the perfect sister, but behind that silence, she was tightening the noose. Robert began coming home more tense, snapping at small things. Margaret grew restless, her laughter thinner, her eyes darting whenever they were together. Evelyn watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. They thought they were playing her, but in truth, she was the one pulling every string. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn slept soundly. Not because the betrayal hurt less, but because she finally understood the strength of silence. It wasn't weakness, it was power, and she was just getting started. The first signs of unease had already taken root. Robert's voice grew sharper when he spoke to Margaret. Margaret's laughter, once carefree, now carried a nervous edge. They were still entangled in their secret, but Evelyn had begun to weave her invisible web around them, and she reveled in watching it tighten. One afternoon, Robert returned home earlier than usual. Evelyn, calm as always, was folding laundry when he entered the bedroom, his face lined with tension. "Did anyone call today?" he asked casually, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Evelyn looked up with her gentle eyes. "Just a few telemarketers." "Why?" He shook his head. "No reason." But his lips pressed into a thin line, betraying his unease. Evelyn smiled softly, as if reassured. In truth, she knew exactly why he asked. The anonymous voicemail she had left at his office that morning, "Does your wife know?" had done its work. He didn't know whether it came from a stranger or someone closer. The paranoia had begun to gnaw at him. Margaret wasn't spared either. A few nights later, Evelyn invited Margaret over for dinner. She cooked Margaret's favorite dish, pouring glasses of wine with her usual warmth. But as they sat at the table, Evelyn slid an envelope across the surface. "What's this?" Margaret asked, frowning slightly. "Just something I found in the mailbox," Evelyn said lightly. Margaret hesitated before opening it. Inside, a single printed line on plain paper. "He's lying to both of you." Her fingers trembled. She glanced at Evelyn, but her sister's expression was unreadable. Calm, curious, perhaps even sympathetic. Margaret forced a laugh. "Probably just some prank." Evelyn murmured, sipping her wine. "Strange, though. Why would someone send it here, to my address?" For a long second, their eyes met. Evelyn let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating, before turning the conversation to lighter topics. But she knew the seed had been planted. Soon, the cracks widened. Margaret began calling Robert less frequently, her voice sharp with suspicion when she did. Robert, already restless, snapped at her for doubting him. Their stolen moments together, once filled with reckless passion, became laced with bickering and mistrust. Evelyn didn't need to interfere much anymore. She had become a quiet observer, orchestrating from the shadows, nudging here and there when necessary. She would whisper a single phrase, disguised as casual conversation, and watch it unravel them further. "I saw Robert looking tired lately. You should take care of him," she'd tell Margaret with a knowing smile. Or to Robert, "Margaret seemed distracted when she visited yesterday. Do you think something's bothering her?" Harmless words on the surface, deadly daggers underneath. One night, Evelyn staged her most delicate move yet. She left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while Robert was making himself a drink. On the screen, a draft message glowed faintly. "I know what you've done. It won't stay hidden forever." The message wasn't sent, just sitting there, waiting to be noticed. Robert froze. His hand tightened around the glass. "Evelyn? What's this?" he asked, holding up the phone. She looked up innocently, feigning surprise. "Oh, that? Just something I typed when I was angry the other day. Didn't even mean to leave it open." Robert's face paled. He muttered something and set the phone down, but Evelyn saw the panic in his eyes. That night, he lay stiff in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling, while Evelyn slept soundly with a faint smile. The brilliance of her plan wasn't in confrontation. It was in the not knowing. Robert and Margaret didn't know who to trust anymore, her, each other, or themselves. Margaret began texting Robert furiously. "Did she find out? Did you tell her?" Robert replied with anger, "You're being paranoid. Stop making this worse." But deep down, both of them were spiraling. And Evelyn watched, silent, steady, in control. Weeks passed, and Evelyn escalated again. She slipped a USB drive into Robert's briefcase, containing snippets of recordings she had gathered. Nothing explicit, just fragments. His voice, Margaret's laugh, their hushed tones. When he discovered it at work, Robert nearly collapsed with fear. Was Evelyn behind it? Was it someone else? Had Margaret been careless? That night, he confronted Margaret in hushed, frantic tones during one of their meetings. Evelyn, of course, had planted a small recorder nearby. "Did you give her something?" "No," he hissed. "You think I'd risk that?" "Then how did she doesn't know. Stop panicking." But both of them were panicking, and Evelyn had their words captured, filed, and ready. Her favorite part, though, wasn't their fighting. It was the way they tried so hard to maintain their masks in front of her. At family gatherings, Margaret still hugged her warmly, though her hands shook slightly. Robert still kissed her cheek when guests were around, though his eyes darted nervously, searching hers for answers. And Evelyn? She was the picture of serenity. Smiling, hosting, laughing, all while holding the knife of silence against their throats. But Evelyn wasn't finished. One evening, she sat alone in her study reviewing her collection, photos, recordings, notes. Her revenge wasn't just about destroying them. No, that would be too merciful. She wanted them to destroy each other, and they already were. Every whisper, every sidelong glance, every argument added another crack to the fragile glass of their affair. Evelyn only had to wait for it to shatter. Still, she couldn't resist. She picked up a pen, wrote a simple note, and slipped it into Robert's wallet while he was showering. "She's not the only one lying to you." When he found it days later, his face drained of color. He stared at Margaret differently after that. The suspicion Evelyn had planted bloomed fully into poison. Margaret noticed. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she snapped. "Because I don't know if I can trust you," he muttered. And with that, Evelyn's work deepened. The silence was her masterpiece. No shouting, no public scenes, no dramatic revelations. Just carefully placed doubts, whispers in the dark, shadows that grew until they swallowed everything. And Robert and Margaret, once bound together by passion, were now bound by fear. Fear of each other, fear of Evelyn, fear of what she knew and what she might do next. Evelyn closed her eyes that night with a satisfied sigh. Her revenge wasn't loud. It was silent, elegant, devastating. And it was far from over. The house had become a stage, and Evelyn, its director. Every glance, every silence, every misplaced word, it all unfolded exactly as she intended. But she wasn't satisfied with quiet paranoia anymore. No, Evelyn was ready to push. It began subtly. One morning, she placed an unfamiliar perfume bottle on the bathroom counter, a brand Margaret often wore. She made sure Robert noticed it while shaving. He froze, staring at the glass bottle. "Evelyn, where did this come from?" he asked cautiously. Evelyn, drying her hair, frowned as though puzzled. "I don't know. Maybe I bought it ages ago? Or Margaret left it here when she stayed over." The suggestion hung heavy. Robert said nothing, but his grip on the razor tightened. That evening, when he met Margaret, his first words were cold. "Why would you leave your perfume at my house?" Margaret's eyes widened. "What? Are you saying Evelyn? Maybe you're being careless. Maybe she knows more than she lets on." Margaret's pulse raced. "You think I'd risk that?" But the seed of confrontation had already been planted. Evelyn smiled to herself as she read quietly in the next room, the faint echoes of their muffled argument slipping through the wall. She escalated again the following week. A dinner party. Friends, colleagues, laughter filling the house. Evelyn moved gracefully between conversations, topping off wine glasses, her calm mask never slipping. But beneath the table, she had slipped a folded note into Robert's jacket pocket earlier. "Everyone is watching you. Don't slip." Robert discovered it midway through the evening. He stiffened, his eyes darting nervously around the room. To everyone else, it looked like nothing, but Evelyn saw the sweat bead at his temple. He fumbled through small talk, his laughter forced, his words clipped. Margaret, noticing, pressed her hand discreetly against his knee under the table. But even that gesture, Evelyn had anticipated. She leaned slightly closer, her voice light, her smile perfect. "You two seem so tense tonight," she whispered. Margaret froze. Robert's jaw tightened, and Evelyn floated away before either could respond, leaving silence and suspicion in her wake. But the brilliance of Evelyn's revenge wasn't just the private torment. She wanted Robert and Margaret to unravel in public. And so she began planting traps. She sent Margaret an anonymous message. "Meet him at the cafe at 3. Don't be late." She sent Robert a different one. "She'll betray you if you don't confront her today." At exactly 3 o'clock, Evelyn sat in her car across the street, dark sunglasses hiding her eyes. She watched them arrive, Margaret first, nervous, glancing around, Robert moments later, tense, jaw clenched. Their meeting was a storm. Words flew, hands gestured sharply. Passerbys turned their heads, whispers spreading. Evelyn's lips curled in quiet satisfaction. Their affair, which was once carefully hidden, was now becoming a rumor, a shadow creeping into daylight, exactly as she planned. At home, Evelyn played the part of the serene wife. She prepared dinners, smiled at neighbors, continued her routines. But behind closed doors, her games grew sharper. She began leaving small objects where Robert couldn't ignore them. A lipstick smeared on a napkin in his briefcase, a hairpin on his desk at work, a receipt for a hotel room slipped into his wallet. Each item perfectly chosen, perfectly timed. Robert grew frantic, accusing Margaret of carelessness. Margaret snapped back, insisting she had nothing to do with it. Their voices, once filled with passion, now dripped with venom. And Evelyn? She hummed softly as she watered her plants, as if unaware. But she wasn't done yet. One night, she arranged her final rehearsal before the true unraveling. She invited Margaret over under the pretense of a family dinner. The table was set, candles flickering, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Halfway through the meal, Evelyn excused herself to the kitchen. She left her phone deliberately on the table, unlocked. On the screen, a draft email addressed to herself. Subject: confession. Body: I know about Robert and Margaret. It's almost time to tell the world. Both Robert and Margaret saw it. Their faces drained of color. Margaret's fork clattered against her plate. Robert reached for the phone, his hand trembling, but Evelyn returned calmly, picked it up without looking, and slipped it into her pocket. "Everything all right?" she asked sweetly. Neither of them spoke. The silence was louder than any scream. By now, Evelyn's trap had nearly closed. Robert avoided Margaret in public, fearful of eyes watching. Margaret grew resentful, accusing him of cowardice. Their stolen meetings became battlegrounds of paranoia and mistrust. And Evelyn? She had all the proof she needed: photos, recordings, whispers, receipts. But she wasn't ready to end it yet. Not until they had completely destroyed themselves. And so she crafted the final act. She sat at her desk late one night, pen in hand, and wrote 2 identical letters. To Robert, she's preparing to expose you. To Margaret, he's already betrayed you to save himself. Both delivered anonymously. Both guaranteed to ignite chaos. When Robert confronted Margaret days later, the fight erupted like fire. Voices rose, accusations flew, tears, rage, betrayal spilled into the open. Neighbors heard, friends whispered, exactly as Evelyn intended. From her window, Evelyn watched as Robert stormed out of the house, Margaret screaming after him, both of them shattering under the weight of secrets and lies. She closed the curtain gently, a serene smile on her lips. Her silent revenge had blossomed into public ruin. And yet, this was not the end, because Evelyn knew the sweetest part was still to come. Not just their fall, but the moment they realized it was her hand that guided them all along. And that moment, she promised herself, would be unforgettable. The storm Evelyn had been quietly building was finally ready to break. Weeks of careful manipulation, whispers, and staged discoveries had left Robert and Margaret hanging by threads. Trust between them was shattered, replaced with suspicion, fear, and resentment. And Evelyn? She was about to slice through the last fragile strands holding them together. It started with an invitation. Evelyn organized a small gathering at the house. Just a few neighbors, a couple of Robert's colleagues, and some of Margaret's close friends. Nothing extravagant, just enough people for whispers to spread like wildfire once the spark was lit. Robert, already paranoid, had begged her not to invite. "Why invite so many people? What are you planning?" Evelyn only smiled, brushing his cheek gently. "Darling, it's been so long since we entertained. Everyone misses us. Besides, don't you want to show the world how perfect everything still is?" Her words dripped with irony, but Robert, cornered, could do nothing but nod. The night arrived. Candles flickered, wine poured, laughter floated in the air. Evelyn moved gracefully among the guests, her calm smile hiding the storm beneath. Robert sat stiffly at the head of the table, sweat beading at his temple. Margaret, trying too hard to seem composed, downed glass after glass of wine. And then Evelyn gave the performance of her life. She rose, tapping her glass gently. "Before dessert, I'd like to share something personal." All eyes turned to her. Robert's heart dropped. Margaret's hand trembled. Evelyn unfolded a small stack of photographs, carefully chosen, perfectly timed. Each one captured Robert and Margaret in stolen moments. A hand brushing another's arm, a too long glance, a secret meeting across town. Gasps filled the room. Evelyn's voice was calm, steady. "It seems my husband and my dear friend have been closer than I realized." Robert lurched to his feet. "Evelyn, don't!" But Margaret interrupted, her face pale, eyes wide. "You set this up. You've been—" Evelyn tilted her head, her smile chilling. "Spying? No, Margaret. Observing and recording for months." She laid down more evidence, receipts, notes, even audio clips. Every shred of proof was there, undeniable. The room buzzed with shock, whispers spreading like wildfire. Robert's colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. Margaret's friends looked at her with betrayal. The perfect facade was burning away, piece by piece. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She turned to the crowd, her voice soft, almost mournful. "I stayed silent because I believed in love, in loyalty, but silence only feeds betrayal. Tonight, I refuse to be silent any longer." Her words, rehearsed and deliberate, struck like daggers. Margaret, trembling, slammed her glass down. "She's twisting everything! Robert, tell them!" But Robert was frozen, sweat dripping, his eyes darting wildly. He tried to speak, but the words collapsed in his throat. The silence was louder than any confession. And then Evelyn struck the final blow. She picked up her phone and tapped the screen. A projector whirred to life, casting a video across the wall. The footage played, Robert and Margaret in a hotel room recorded secretly through a hidden camera Evelyn had planted weeks ago. The room fell into stunned silence. Every laugh, every touch, every whispered word between them was now laid bare for everyone to see. Margaret gasped, covering her mouth. Robert staggered back, his face ashen. The guests had frozen, unable to look away. And Evelyn? She stood tall, her expression serene, as though the chaos around her was nothing more than a symphony she had composed. When the video ended, the room erupted. Whispers, gasps, shocked glances. Some guests excused themselves, unable to stay. Others remained, watching the implosion unfold. Margaret burst into tears. You destroyed me!" Evelyn's smile was razor sharp. "No, Margaret, you destroyed yourself. I only handed you the mirror." Robert tried to step toward Evelyn, his voice breaking. "You can't do this. You'll ruin everything, my career, our lives." Her eyes locked on his, cold and unflinching. "Our lives? Robert, you ruined that the moment you chose her over me." His colleagues, pale and uncomfortable, whispered among themselves. They had seen enough. His reputation, his carefully constructed image was collapsing. The party dissolved quickly after that. Guests left in hushed groups, casting pitying or judgmental glances back at Robert and Margaret. By the time the last car pulled away, only the three of them remained in the echoing silence of the ruined dinner. Margaret's mascara streaked her cheeks, her hands shaking. "I can't do this anymore," she muttered, grabbing her coat and storming out into the night. Robert slumped into a chair, his face hollow. "Why, Evelyn? Why go this raw?" Evelyn stood at the head of the table, the queen surveying the wreckage of her conquered enemies. "Because you needed to feel what I felt. Every lie, every humiliation, every silent night knowing the truth but pretending not to. I wanted you to drown in it."
Robert buried his face in his hands, and Evelyn turned away, her work complete. But as she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, she knew this was not truly the end. Public exposure had shattered Robert and Margaret. Yes, their reputations, their bond, their trust, everything lay in ruins. But Evelyn had something else still hidden. A final piece of revenge, darker and deeper than either of them could imagine. Because Evelyn wasn't just content to ruin their love, she wanted to own their downfall. And soon the world would know it was her hand that orchestrated every step.
The house was silent after the disastrous dinner party, but the silence was not peace. It was the kind of silence that lingered after an explosion, the kind where the dust still hung in the air and the wreckage was just beginning to reveal itself. Robert sat slumped in the dining chair, head buried in his hands, replaying the humiliation over and over. His colleagues had seen everything, his friends, his neighbors. Every shred of the image he had spent decades building had been ripped away in a single night. Margaret hadn't returned. She had stormed out hours ago, and Evelyn didn't expect her to come back. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. And Evelyn? She moved calmly through the ruins of the evening, gathering glasses, snuffing out candles, humming softly as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, she was sharper than ever. The trap had only just closed. The fallout was where the real power lay. The next morning, Robert's phone buzzed relentlessly. Dozens of messages from colleagues, calls from his boss, emails demanding explanations. Rumors were already spreading across the company. By noon, Robert was summoned to the office. When he returned that evening, his face was pale, lips trembling. "They've suspended me," he whispered. "Pending investigation. They want me to step down." Evelyn only raised an eyebrow. "You? Step down? But you're their golden boy. Surely they wouldn't. Unless, of course, they saw something last night that made you untouchable." Robert's head snapped toward her, anger flaring. "You planned this. You knew this would ruin me." Evelyn's calm never wavered. "I didn't ruin you, Robert. You did that the moment you chose her." His anger collapsed into despair. He buried his face in his hands again, muttering, "Everything I've built, gone." Evelyn watched silently, the satisfaction warm, but not yet complete. Margaret, meanwhile, was unraveling in her own way. Her friends had stopped answering her calls. Whispered gossip followed her at the cafe, at the grocery store, in the very streets she used to walk with pride. And Evelyn made sure of it. Anonymous messages found their way into group chats. Subtle rumors drifted into conversations. Little accidents ensured Margaret's humiliation spread further every day. Soon, Margaret's employer called her in as well. A teacher, once admired by parents and students alike, she now faced complaints and whispers that made her position impossible. Within a week, she was asked to resign. Margaret's world shrunk overnight. Friends gone, job gone, reputation gone. And Evelyn? She was the quiet puppeteer, pulling strings from the shadows, never leaving fingerprints. One evening, a week after the dinner, Evelyn found Robert sitting in the darkened living room, a bottle of whiskey half empty beside him, his eyes red-shot and empty. "They'll never hire me again. My career is finished. Margaret won't speak to me.
Everything's gone. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice soft but cold. Now you know what it feels like to lose everything, Robert. To be invisible, to be pitied, to be whispered about. He looked up at her, hollow and broken. Why, Evelyn? What do you want from me? She leaned down, her lips brushing his ear. I want you to live in it, to breathe it, every single day. I want you to wake up knowing I control the ruins of your life. His shoulders shook, not with anger. No, Robert was far beyond anger now, with fear. For the first time, he realized Evelyn wasn't simply avenging betrayal. She was enjoying it. But Evelyn's plan didn't stop at their reputations. She had discovered more in her months of quiet observation. Hidden bank accounts Robert used to fund his secret meetings with Margaret. Emails suggesting shady business dealings at his company. Even a few illegal shortcuts Robert had taken over the years. Shortcuts that could, if exposed, put him behind bars. And Evelyn had neatly collected it all, tucked away in a file that could destroy him with the push of a button. She watched Robert spiral day after day, never revealing that she still held the final card. Because power wasn't just about destroying someone. It was about keeping them dangling, forever aware that you could destroy them whenever you pleased. Margaret fared no better. Evelyn made sure she felt isolated by planting whispers in the community that Margaret was manipulative, that she had preyed on a friend's marriage for years. Parents pulled their children away when she walked by. Old friends crossed the street to avoid her. Margaret's once perfect smile dissolved into paranoia. She stopped leaving her house. Her curtains stayed drawn. The woman who once carried herself like royalty now looked like a ghost. And Evelyn, ever the silent observer, watched with quiet satisfaction. One evening, Evelyn sat alone at the kitchen table, sipping tea as she flipped through the file of evidence. Robert's career was gone. Margaret's reputation was in ashes. Both of them were shells of who they used to be. But Evelyn wasn't finished, because revenge wasn't just about destroying the present. It was about owning the future. And Evelyn had a new plan. A plan that would leave Robert and Margaret not just ruined, but erased. The storm outside raged against the windows, but inside the house, Evelyn sat in perfect stillness. On the table before her lay a neat black folder. Every page, every screenshot, every account number carefully organized. This was no longer just about humiliation. This was about erasure. Robert was upstairs, asleep after another night of heavy drinking. Margaret hadn't been seen in days. Rumors said she rarely left her apartment anymore. Her once bright smile dimmed to nothing. Evelyn sipped her tea and smiled. Now was the time. The next morning, Robert stumbled downstairs, disheveled and hollow-eyed. Evelyn slid a piece of paper across the table. "What's this?" he muttered. "Your future," she replied calmly. Robert glanced at it. Bank statements, offshore accounts, wire transfers he thought no one knew about. Money funneled quietly out of the company and into secret holdings. His face drained of color. How did you get these?" Evelyn's eyes gleamed. "You left crumbs, Robert. All I had to do was follow them. And now," she tapped the papers, "now I hold everything."
His hands trembled. "If this gets out, You'll lose more than your career. You'll lose your freedom." Robert collapsed into the chair, his breathing shallow. He knew she was right. This was not gossip or scandal anymore. This was prison time. Evelyn let the silence stretch before speaking again. "But don't worry, Robert. I haven't shared it yet. I could, at any moment, but I won't unless you give me reason to." His eyes widened, a mix of terror and confusion. You mean you want me to live under this forever?" She leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "Exactly." While Robert spiraled, Evelyn turned her attention to Margaret. It was almost too easy. A few anonymous tips sent to the school board about her inappropriate relationships, a suggestion that she'd used her position to manipulate people. Combined with the humiliation of the dinner party, the whispers now became official complaints. Margaret was summoned, questioned, and then formally blacklisted from working in education again. Her income vanished overnight. Bills piled up. Rent notices arrived. Friends ignored her. Family turned cold. And when Margaret finally broke down, calling Robert in desperation, Evelyn was there to watch. She stood in the hallway as Robert answered the phone. His voice cracked with shame as Margaret sobbed through the receiver, begging for help. "I can't. I have nothing left to give," he whispered. Evelyn smiled in the shadows. 2 lives crumbling in her hands. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She began to move money quietly, shifting funds Robert thought were untouchable. With the documents she'd collected, she could access enough to choke his financial security completely. One morning, Robert awoke to discover his accounts frozen, his credit cards declined, his assets locked. He confronted Evelyn, panic in his voice. "They've frozen everything. How?" Evelyn only poured herself coffee. "Actions have consequences, Robert. Perhaps someone reported suspicious activity. Perhaps the authorities are already watching. Who can say?" His chest heaved. "You did this." She looked at him, expression unreadable. "I warned you. I told you I could destroy you whenever I wished." For the first time, Robert dropped to his knees before her. "Please, Evelyn, I have nothing left. Please stop." But Evelyn only stared down at him, the man who once betrayed her, reduced now to begging at her feet. Margaret, too, began to unravel beyond repair. With no job and no income, she sold her jewelry, then her car, then furniture piece by piece. Each sale was another step into humiliation. Evelyn watched from afar, ensuring every buyer knew exactly why she was so desperate. By the time Margaret realized she couldn't keep her apartment, it was already too late. Eviction notices appeared. Neighbors whispered as movers carried her belongings into the street. She had nowhere to go. Robert and Margaret, once so proud, so untouchable, were now shadows. And Evelyn, standing in the quiet of her living room, looked at the black folder again. The documents remained untouched, unsent. She had enough to end Robert with a single email, but she didn't need to. Not yet. The power wasn't in pressing send. The power was in knowing she could. Every moment Robert breathed was another reminder that Evelyn controlled his fate. Every day Margaret struggled was proof that Evelyn's silence was louder than their screams. Late one night, Robert sat across from her, his face gaunt, eyes sunken.
"You've taken everything," he whispered. "My job, my money, my reputation, Margaret's life. What else could you possibly want?" Evelyn tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "I don't want anything, Robert. I already have it." He stared at her, confusion etched deep into his broken face. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, voice soft as silk. "I have control, and I always will." The storm outside eased into silence, but inside, Robert and Margaret's lives were far from calm, because Evelyn wasn't finished. The next phase would not just ruin them, it would erase them completely.
The clock ticked past midnight. Evelyn sat alone in her study, the glow of the computer screen illuminating her calm face. On the screen, a single email draft. Attached were files, bank transfers, hidden offshore accounts, incriminating messages between Robert and Margaret, even confidential photos Evelyn had saved for this exact moment. One click. That was all it would take. But Evelyn's finger hovered above the mouse, steady, deliberate. "Not yet," she whispered. Because destruction wasn't satisfying if it happened all at once. The real art was in erasure, piece by piece, until the world forgot Robert and Margaret had ever mattered at all. The next morning, Evelyn set her plan into motion. It began quietly, with a phone call to a journalist, a man eager for a story, desperate for something sensational. Evelyn fed him crumbs, anonymous tips about corruption at Robert's firm, whispers of moral misconduct, rumors that Margaret had manipulated students for personal gain. Within a week, the headlines appeared. Local executive under investigation for fraud allegations. Former teacher accused of exploiting position. Community demands answers. Names were dragged through mud. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Organizations erased any trace of Robert's and Margaret's achievements from their websites. The erasure had begun. Robert, frantic, tried to defend himself. He called lawyers, begged for statements to clear his name. But every word he spoke only fueled more rumors. Every denial sounded like guilt. Margaret attempted the same. She went to the school board, pleaded with them to reconsider, but they wouldn't even look at her. Parents had already signed petitions. Her name was now a warning, not a memory. Every door closed. Every friend disappeared. Evelyn orchestrated the next blow with precision. She arranged for Robert's professional licenses to be reviewed. With the evidence she had, the process was inevitable. One hearing later, he was stripped of his credentials. He could no longer practice, no longer work in his field. Margaret fared no better. Her teaching certification was revoked, officially, permanently. The two of them weren't just disgraced, they were erased from their professions. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She began contacting charitable organizations, local clubs, even small-town committees where Robert and Margaret's names still lingered. With a few quiet suggestions and strategically leaked documents, plaques were removed, photos taken down, awards rescinded. It was as if they had never been celebrated at all. One by one, every trace of recognition vanished. Robert sat in the dark one evening staring at his phone. He scrolled through old articles where his name once appeared in bold print, press releases praising his success, interviews showcasing his achievements. Now, every link led to dead pages, every mention deleted. His legacy dissolved into nothing. Margaret's spiral was even more brutal.
She attended a former student's wedding, desperate to prove she was still remembered. But when she approached, the bride frowned in confusion. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Margaret's chest collapsed. She stammered her name only to see the bride shake her head. "I don't remember you." Because Evelyn had made sure she wouldn't. Through carefully planted stories, she had reshaped memory itself. Margaret wasn't a beloved mentor anymore. She was a ghost. Evelyn watched it all unfold with clinical precision. This wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. This was deletion. Robert and Margaret weren't just punished. They were erased. And for Evelyn, that was the sweetest justice. One night, Robert confronted her again. His voice was raw, his hands trembling. "You've taken everything. My career, my reputation, even my name. People don't remember me anymore. It's like I never existed. Why, Evelyn? Why won't you just finish it?" Evelyn regarded him with cold detachment. "Because ending you isn't enough. I want the world to erase you, to live as though you never mattered. That is true justice." Robert collapsed to his knees, his body shaking. His sobs filled the silence, but Evelyn's face didn't change. To her, he was already gone. Margaret, meanwhile, slipped further into obscurity. No one returned her calls. Family members claimed they hadn't seen her in years, even when she stood before them. It was as if Evelyn had rewritten reality itself, turning Margaret into an unwanted memory, a shadow with no voice. The final blow came when Margaret checked the school archives, searching for proof she had once taught there. Yearbooks, faculty photos, even her name on staff rosters, gone, deleted. Margaret stared at the empty records, trembling, her identity stripped away completely. She whispered through tears, "Am I even real anymore?" And Evelyn, watching from her window, finally allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had achieved what betrayal had once denied her: complete control. Robert and Margaret weren't just punished. They were erased. Forever.
The storm had passed, but the silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Robert woke each morning to the same suffocating emptiness. His once bustling calendar, business meetings, lunches with colleagues, phone calls lined up back to back, was now a blank sheet. His phone rarely rang, and when it did, it was usually spam, not friends. He scrolled endlessly through his contacts list, fingers hovering above familiar names, but he knew what would happen if he called. "Sorry, I don't know you." Click. It was the same every time. The erasure was complete. Evelyn's plan had left him stripped not only of reputation, but of recognition itself. He wasn't Robert anymore. He was just a nobody. Margaret's life had collapsed into a different kind of silence. Her once vibrant home was now cluttered with unopened mail, rejection letters, and dust-covered boxes filled with memories that no longer held meaning. She would often sit at her kitchen table, staring at faded photographs. Her face was in them, smiling beside groups of children, laughing during school trips, clapping at ceremonies. But when she compared them with the new digital archives she accessed online, she was nowhere to be found. Her name erased, her image replaced, her existence denied. Sometimes she wondered if she had imagined it all. The community that had once praised Margaret and Robert now behaved as if they had never existed. When they walked into stores, strangers didn't recognize them. When they visited old haunts, owners shrugged. Once,
Margaret overheard a couple whispering. Who are they? The words cut deeper than any insult. Meanwhile, Evelyn thrived. Her company's numbers climbed, investors trusted her judgment more than ever, colleagues admired her sharp mind, her poise, her ability to stay untainted by scandal, unaware that she had been the one to pull every invisible string. She became a respected figure in her industry, even invited to panels and conferences. Cameras flashed when she walked into events. Her name carried weight. And yet, at night, when the applause faded and the lights dimmed, Evelyn often sat alone in her penthouse, staring at the city skyline, her glass of wine untouched, her reflection staring back at her from the window. Victory tasted different in silence. There were moments when memories resurfaced. She would catch herself remembering the early days with Robert, dinners filled with laughter, the warmth of his hand in hers, the promises they once whispered in the dark. She would think of Margaret, too, back when she was just a colleague, someone Evelyn trusted to mentor her. For brief flashes, Evelyn almost grieved what she had lost, but then the pain returned, sharp and familiar, reminding her why she had chosen revenge. Robert, desperate, wrote letters to old friends, to colleagues, to his children, but no one replied. The letters came back unopened, some marked "Return to sender." He tore them up in frustration, his hands shaking, his breath ragged. One night, drunk and broken, he stumbled into Evelyn's building, demanding to see her. The security guards stopped him, but Evelyn appeared in the lobby. She looked at him, not with rage, not even with pity, but with detachment. "Go home, Robert," she said. "I don't have a home anymore," he whispered, his voice cracked, raw with defeat. But Evelyn turned away, and just like that, he no longer existed in her world. Margaret's spiral was quieter. She stopped attending events, stopped trying to reconnect. Her days blurred together in isolation. One evening, she lit a candle and opened her journal, the only place where her name still lived. She wrote pages and pages, desperate to anchor herself in words. I was real. I mattered. I was loved once. But as the ink dried, she realized no one would ever read it. Her words would disappear with her. She blew out the candle and sat in darkness. Evelyn, on the other hand, began receiving invitations from prestigious charities, awards committees, and high-profile organizations. Ironically, some were the same circles Robert and Margaret once belonged to. Her face was on magazine covers, her speeches quoted, her wisdom sought after. She had rewritten the narrative. She was the name people remembered. And yet, beneath the spotlight, a quiet question haunted her. Had she won, or had she simply replaced her pain with emptiness? The world moved on, as it always does. Robert and Margaret faded into obscurity, their names spoken less and less until they vanished from memory altogether. Neighbors forgot them, strangers ignored them, even family denied them. They were ghosts wandering among the living. And Evelyn, she stood tall, celebrated, admired, but sometimes when she caught her own reflection in the mirror, she wondered if she had erased more than just Robert and Margaret. Had she erased herself, too?
The story had ended, but endings are never clean. They linger like shadows. Robert died quietly one winter morning. No one noticed at first. His body lay undiscovered for 2 days in his apartment. The newspapers didn't run obituaries. Former colleagues didn't mourn. His children, now grown, didn't even know until weeks later, and when they did, they shook their heads as if hearing about a stranger. It was the final act of Evelyn's revenge, a man erased not by violence, but by absence. Margaret followed not long after. Her health had withered under the weight of loneliness. Some neighbors remembered an older woman who kept to herself, but no one could recall her name. When she passed, her belongings were boxed up and discarded. The journal she had written, the only proof of her existence, was thrown away with the trash. History had swallowed her whole. And Evelyn? She lived on. She thrived, in fact. Her company expanded internationally. She became a keynote speaker, a philanthropist, a symbol of resilience. Her face was featured on glossy magazine covers with headlines like "The Woman Who Never Backed Down." Crowds clapped when she entered rooms. Reporters scribbled every word she spoke. Strangers admired her strength, her beauty, her brilliance. From the outside, she was untouchable. But inside her penthouse, away from cameras and applause, the silence returned. She had everything she once dreamed of: power, recognition, control. But it was a cold victory. Sometimes she would catch her reflection in the mirror and feel a jolt of disorientation. Was she still Evelyn? Or was she just the hollow shell of a woman rebuilt from vengeance? On her balcony, she often gazed at the city lights shimmering below, the same city where Robert and Margaret had once thrived. They were gone. She had won. But as the night wind brushed against her face, the truth pressed in. Revenge doesn't bring healing. It only replaces pain with emptiness. In the end, Evelyn stood alone at the top. Powerful, feared, remembered, and utterly, irrevocably alone.